note that yesterday you were given a copy of the transportation budget, and in your folder for today you have notes on the presentation. With that, Dylan, would you give us an overview? And I'm going to turn the meeting over to JR here for a while.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Dylan Deere. I'm a managing analyst with the Legislative Research Department, budget analyst. This is my first year with the KDOT budget, hopefully my last year with the KDOT budget. So I'll attempt to cover any of these materials, but we do have, obviously, the Secretary of Transportation and her staff also available to answer some of the more detailed questions, and I'll try and show you where some of the movement is happening and some of the decision points that appear in this budget before you. So if you could turn immediately to page 5. So I'm going to review the fiscal year 2022 analysis. And I will normally start with the 2022 approved budget. That's the budget that this legislative body approved last year for this agency. And I'm going to show you how the agency request and then the governor's recommendation makes adjustments to that approved budget. So starting at the approved at the top, you can see that there's a $2.2 billion budget, or the agency requests $2.1 billion, which includes a state highway fund decrease of 179.7 or 8.3%, and an increase of federal and other funds of 39.9 million or 36.1% above from the 22 approved amount. And there's 2,297.3 FTE full-time equivalent positions for this agency, which is an increase of 47.0 FTE positions above the original approved amount. So there is $4.3 million of state highway fund associated, mostly the state highway fund associated with those FTE position increases. So if you look in item number 2 at the bottom of page 5, these include 25 positions in administration, 31 positions in construction, 5 positions in local support, 10 in transportation planning, and those increases are partially offset by a reduction of 24 FTE positions in maintenance. And and the administration program, it's mostly in operations and support for the district offices and human resources, so that's not all right here in Topeka, that's actually the various HR resources spread across the state. And there's a little bit more detail about some of the other adjustments that are in here as well. So if you want to turn to page 6.
Mr. Chair, we don't, okay, thank you. We couldn't find the budget. Thank you. We found it.
Back to Dylan. Let's go.
Sorry about that. I'll hold just for a moment while we all go to the page. All right. So I'm on page 6 now, but if you want to review those FTE conversations, they started on page 5. So the agency is requesting, in item 3, the agency is requesting a decrease of $13.9 million for contractual engineering services, okay? The decrease is attributable to a $24 million reduction in the construction program, and that there's a slight increase that offsets that due to the road usage study in conjunction with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. There's an additional $1.3 million for litter pickup and highway sweeping in the Kansas City metropolitan area that would be contracted out. There's an additional $920,000 in item 5 for storing and analyzing data on bridges, traffic management, and communications. There's a decrease of $1.2 million in commodities for construction materials and diesel fuel. There's a decrease of $973,000 for construction equipment, and that additional equipment purchases. So what happened in this line is that there was a little bit of budget headroom, okay, in the FY 2021 actuals. So they pre-purchased some additional construction equipment, which allowed the agency to reduce equipment purchases in FY 2022. But when we get to FY 2023, you'll see that number pop back up. There's 14.2 million, all from federal funds for various federal grant programs. These are mostly transit funds that are associated with the CARES Act, so some additional transit funds coming through those federal programs. There's the addition of 3.0 million for a total of 9 million in rail safety improvement funds. There's the addition of 4.5 million for short line rail, okay? But those were mostly carryover funds from the previous fiscal year. So you're seeing an increase as those funds carry over. You have the addition of $7.2 million for coordinated public transportation. And you have an additional $3 million for a transportation technology development fund. This is a new fund that's been created by the and budgeted inside of the agency, and this is specifically for investments in new technologies. So this would be a new line item. There are decreases of $256.8 million in capital improvements expansion projects. The majority of the decrease is in non-interstate capacity improvements. That's about 283.4. And there's also a reduction of about $8.5 million in the cost share program. I've been told that the majority of the cause for these reductions is related to the delay in the US 69 highway project. So you'll just sort of see pickups in the out years as those get moved along. Moving to page 7. Construction local capital improvements. The agency requests the addition of $54.5 million in capital improvements local projects, and that is mostly related to federal aid, FHA aid. There's construction modernization capital improvements, where the agency requested an addition of $39.3 million in capital improvement projects. That's largely tied to non-interstate projects totaling $21.3, but there's also some expenditures for lighting projects and also corridor management as well. For construction preservation, this decreases by $4.5 million in capital improvement projects, and that is related largely to bridge replacement. My understanding is that there might be some other new bridge programs that the Secretary may talk about momentarily. Under building CI, you have the addition of $6 million. And I'm going to talk about building CI in much greater detail towards the end of my presentation. This budget, the Department of Transportation budget, is largely all capital improvements. And so the normal division that you see in budgets between capital improvements and operations isn't quite as clear. The way that it is separated for this purpose is that we break out all those that deal with buildings specifically that are owned by the Department of Transportation and deal with those, and then put all of the other construction into the operations portion of the budget. Moving to the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends expenditures of $2.1 billion, which is an increase of $10.4 million, or 0.5% above the revised estimate. The only adjustment in this budget recommended by the governor in 22 is basically implementing the consensus revenue estimates for the State Highway Fund. And that money goes to local units of government. And this is the way that sort of flows through. And so just as new estimates for fuel, taxes on fuel come in, there's a slight adjustment for that. There's no other adjustments in 22. But with that, I would stand for questions on the 22 agency request and governor's recommendation.
Questions on 22, committee, for Dylan? We do have the agency here later if you have questions for the agency. Seeing none, we'll continue to 23.
Thank you very much. I am moving on to 23 on page 9. So the starting point for the 23 analysis will be the 22 agency revised estimate. I'll note this doesn't include the governor's recommendation. However, the governor's recommendation didn't actually move it very much. So the agency is requesting $2 billion, including $41.3 million in special revenue funds. It's a decrease of $36.7 million, or 1.8% below the 22 revised estimate. So the agency, starting on number 1, the agency requests a reduction of $14.2 million from federal funds, $4.5 million in short line rail, and $3.3 million in rail safety improvements. And I covered those fast because that's just you backing out. That's just the agency backing out those increases that you saw in 22 to get back to the starting point. Starting in item 4, the agency requests increased expenditures in commodities by $3.5 million above the 22 revised estimate, and the majority of that increase is in highway construction materials. There's also some vehicle parts and fuel, so you're going to take an asphalt. The actual physical things that make roads is tied up in here. For maintenance program equipment, the agency is requesting the addition of $3.7 million in a maintenance program, and that's highway construction equipment. So you're seeing that flex back after the reduction that you saw in the previous year. Under maintenance program salaries, the agency requests the addition of $2.9 million in maintenance program salaries. The majority of the increase is in unclassified compensation, that's $2.1 million. And turning to page 10, I think is the executive directive that's related to, yes, 20-539, which is in equipment operator pay. So this is the increase as a result of the implementation of that executive directive. I believe there were some costs associated with that in the previous fiscal year, but they were absorbed within existing resources. For the cost share program, you're seeing a reduction of $10.8 million in the cost share program. That is the cost share estimate is based upon known projects. So we can expect that number to sort of bump up in the out years as additional projects are let and committed to as part of the cost share program, which has a 15% match associated with it. There's a construction reallocation. So the agency requested a reduction of $19.4 million in construction program capital improvements. So the agency is substantially reallocating expenditures between expansion and modernization, okay, as priorities shift. But we can expect some additional changes as plans firm up in the coming year. For non-tech aid to local units, so you're excluding that Transportation Technology Development Fund, okay, the agency is requesting the addition of $4.3 million for aid to local units. And the majority of that increase is in coordinated public transportation assistance, $2 million, and general aviation, $1 million. And I skipped over that Transportation Development Fund in item 9, but that's just reversing out that first allocation of expenditures in FY 2022. And there's going to be an increase of $2 million in buildings capital improvements. If I could touch on the governor's recommendation really quickly, from an expenditure perspective, the governor's recommendation, the only change is adjusting again for that highway fund estimates. All right, so that adds $10.6 million. However, there were a bunch of transfer adjustments. So the governor recommendation also eliminates transfers from the State Highway Fund to the KDADs for mental health grants, to the Office of Emergency Communications and the Adjutant General's Office, and for debt service on State House bonds totaling about $20.4 million. And the recommendation also eliminates the transfer to the State General Fund. And everyone should have a sheet like this that I dropped off on your table as I came in. And it just sort of outlines sort of that ordinary or historically routine transfers on the bottom and the extraordinary transfers on the top. And you can see that zeroed out on the right-hand side to eliminate those extraordinary transfers. With that, I would stand for questions on the 23 budget before discussing capital improvements.
Questions on the 23 Budget Committee for Dylan? Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. You did a great job. I don't know why you would want to be off of this. This seems like a lot of fun. Just on that technology piece, just to be very clear, it sounds like we've moved that technology, I forget what it was called, the fund around advancing technology.
Transportation Technology Development Fund.
We're moving that forward, or we're pulling that into a sooner time frame, and that's why we're removing it in the second year out, right?
So since it's budgeted in the current year, and then it just is not budgeted in the out year. So it shows up as a decrease when you compare it to the previous.
So one time for this first year, $3 million.
So this fund, like other funds, probably will have some additional funding that flows into it. It's just before those funds have actually been set or allocated, you just don't put it in the budget. And so we'll see what happens. But I've asked for some additional information on that particular fund, and the agency may be prepared to respond to the questions on that.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the extraordinary transfers and ordinary transfers, you're saying the ordinary transfers are increased slightly, and we're taking out all of the extraordinary ones? Is that what I heard?
That's correct. And honestly, the only ordinary transfer that is budgeted to increase is the amount that goes to the Division of Vehicles Operating Fund. All the other ones are flat.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And that's inside the Department of Revenue, if that's not.
Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to back up to page 5 on your presentation. And under the position increases, so if I understand you right, 24 maintenance positions were eliminated, or is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then we add 47 for a total of 71 positions. But I see that, so I guess I want an explanation. What are those 24 maintenance positions? In detail, I would like to know, where are those based at? Are those, because we're adding 25 positions in administration, and I'd like to know where those are based at.
Okay.
So are we eliminating positions that are out in rural areas, I mean, that's my question. I'm trying to figure this out.
Sure.
And building here in Topeka, that's.
So it's not a total of 71, it's a total of 47, okay, just to be clear, because you have the.
You're replacing the 24.
That's
so-
correct. So you just want to break down on the maintenance reductions. And I don't have that with me today, but it is something I can get for you.
Okay. I just like to see all of them. I mean, you've got 25 in administration, 31 in construction, 5 in local support, and 10 in positions in transportation planning. Why is there a difference between transportation planning? I mean, I'd like to see the difference between that and the administration, where those jobs are all going to be located.
Sure.
Where they're not, where the ones that are being eliminated, please. Thank you.
I think I already have some data on that from the department, so let me just put it together in a format that'll be easy to digest. I'll get it to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And perhaps the agency can address that as well. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Chairman, apologies to you both. Thank you, Dylan, and I have a feeling you will be doing this budget again next year. You did such a good job. On the FTEs, I have a question on it. How many unfilled FTEs does the agency have currently? And I know they're having a problem filling those. And are those paid or unpaid? Also, I have concerns from constituents. I would be remiss if I did not bring this up about pay increases for KDOT employees. Is there anything in the budget that allows for that or provides for it, and it is across the board, or is it selective?
So KDOT would not be excluded from the 5% across the board salary adjustment. That's part of the governor's recommendation. I don't know what the status is on that. There's obviously the maintenance operator executive directive that's associated and budgeted in FY 2023. Other than that, I think that there's still outstanding questions about how exactly to implement salary adjustments. There was a lot of testimony on the House side and House Transportation Budget Committee regarding salary issues at the Department of Transportation and questions about issues of, private sector pay versus public sector pay. So I can share some of that testimony with you if you like.
That would be great, if I may, Mr. Vice Chairman. So I would also like to know if some of those unpaid position or paid positions that aren't filled, if that money could be used for the people that are actually doing the work now. And I know we don't want to get into micromanaging the agency, but it is a grave concern. And also, is that 5% budget for salaries included in this, the governor's recommendation?
It's not. So the 5% budget for salaries is actually a global, and then it goes to the State Finance Council to approve a certification. So what happens is that they wait until the end of the year, figure out how many people are currently employed, and then they come up with an allocation on that, and then the State Finance Council would sign off on that.
Thank you. So that is disconcerting. What else is not included in these department budgets that we need to know? Because we're not seeing the bottom line. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and Chairman.
Committee, any further questions for Dylan before we move to the agency?
I do have capital to touch on.
Pardon me, you did mention that. Yeah, capital improvement budgets, Dylan.
I will move on to capital improvements budgets. I will point out that there were quite a few performance measures that were submitted by this agency as well. Those performance measures are at the program level. I'm just going to touch on a few of them real briefly. Also on the vacant positions, I did give the agency a heads up. They might be anticipating that question, so they might have some information already prepared. Under the administration program on page 12, you can see the percent of bridges by deck area classified as good going from 71 to 67, and the percent of in item 4, the percent of non-interstate state highway miles classified as good going from 62 to 58. I believe that issue has been addressed previously by the secretary. That's largely related to the fact that less maintenance is done on things that are classified as good, so they tend to decline. But nonetheless, I want to point out those measures. If you turn to page 13, you can see the percent of total cost of highway construction projects completed over or under budget. You can see the 3-year average of that is 1.4%. They do not anticipate, so there's zeros in the out years. They don't say we were planning to come in over budget, obviously. But we will probably anticipate that number going up substantially with the effects of inflation. Turning to page 14. You can see in item 2 and item 3 substantial increases in the serious injuries and fatalities. And, I think there's already been some testimony submitted around those issues. And on item 8, I wanted to point out that annual ridership for urban public transit operators with a big reduction in 2021 as a result of the pandemic, but still sort of trending and even targeting slightly below historical patterns. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Moving forward, on page 16, you can see the total number of dollars and millions awarded to public government authorities going from 142. It's an average of 111 and a target of 125. And the total number of projects awarded, sort of averaging 144 and targeting 150. So that's more or less flat on the local support front. Moving forward on that, maintenance is okay. Okay, I think there's some other performance measures, quite a few other performance measures that you might look at your own time, but everything else seems more or less flat, so I won't waste the committee's time with it. Moving forward on capital improvements on page 23. And I'll try to cover this quickly so in respect for the committee's time. The agency requests $21 million in capital improvements for buildings in '22. That request is an increase of $6 million above the 2022 approved budget, and the majority of the increase is in sub-area modernization. So there's $4.6 billion in rehabilitation and repair. That's just general rehab as it comes up. Turning to the next page. There's 11 locations that have been budgeted for re-roofing, and in the bullet you can see, you have like Omega and Holton Dome, Abilene. This is mostly salt storage domes, and you can see that list there. For sub-area modernization, you have $9.5 million all from the State Highway Fund, and that's Hill City, Oberlin, Osborne, and Scott City. There's land purchases in Garnett and Independence. There's some money, $245,000 in for a chemical storage facility upgrade. There's $1.6 million in for updated the electrical bay and extension district shop. And both those, the sub-area modernizations, the chemical storage facilities, the electrical bay shops, those are things you see in their capital improvements budgets every year. So this is an ongoing modernization effort. There's a request to relocate the area in Concordia, which includes about $3.5 million from Mankato. And the governor concurs with that in '22. And with your permission, I'll just go ahead and cover the '23 capital improvements budget, and we can talk about it at that point. So there's an increase of $2 million above the 2022 revised estimate, and the majority of that increase is for construction of a new District 1 headquarters in Topeka. So there's $4.2 million for rehab and repair. You have 9 locations for re-roofing, once again, mostly salt domes. You have $5.4 million for sub-area modernizations, Abilene, Beloit, Iola, Medicine Lodge this year, or in the out year. There is land purchase agreements to expand existing locations in Erie and Lyons. Moving to the last page. Again, you see the chemical storage facility, this one time in Pratt, and the updated electrical bay shop, this time in Ulysses. And on the last item, this is probably the biggest capital improvements item, is the construction of District 1 headquarters in Topeka. The agency is requesting $11 million, but that's not all in this budget. The $7.5 million of that is budgeted for fiscal year 2024, which is outside of the time horizon of this budget that's in before you right now. And so the project would relocate and consolidate to a single site the following facilities: District 1 headquarters office, maintenance shop, materials lab, and supply and stock room. And the complex would be built on existing KDOT property near the I-70 interchange at the 21st and Rice Road in East Topeka. The current District 1 headquarters was constructed in 1934. There were additions made in 58, 61, and 85. And the materials lab was constructed in 36. The proposed administration office would be about 14,000 square feet. The stock room would be about 7,500 square feet. The materials lab would be about 6,800 square feet. And you could see sort of some descriptions of what those buildings would entail and what would be included as a portion of them. And the governor concurs with the agency request for capital improvements in '23. So that's the big, everything else for pretty much that you see in their capital improvements budget is just sort of ongoing maintenance and repair of existing facilities. That's the one item really that's outstanding for their capital improvements budget. That would be a diversion. With that, I would stand for questions on capital improvements.
Questions committee, Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the capital improvements, do those have to go through the joint budget committee, or is this a separate kind of deal?
So they will go to the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. In fact, they will go there at noon today, and they will make recommendations to the Senate Ways and Means Committee. However, I've seen recommendations on capital improvements come out of subcommittees as well, so.
And is that mainly on the District 1 headquarters, or is it also on the land purchases and things like that?
It's on any item that's on this as a portion of this.
And then the second question was on the local budget, local disbursements. That doesn't include the amount of money that the locals, we didn't capture that in terms of how much money the locals have actually contributed to those projects as well, right?
It does not. So this is state expenditures only.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions for Dylan on the Capital Improvement Budgets Committee? Seeing none, thank you, Dylan.
Welcome.
We'll call on Secretary Lorenz or staff for the presentation on the KDOT budget from the agency.
Good morning. Joel will help me get the presentation up.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I just wanted to thank you while they're getting ready for all your work and for keeping your employees in mind and all that you guys do as an agency.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see if we are up and,
We only have the room for another 20 minutes, so we might want to get started while he's doing the technology.
all right. So we'll go to the agenda. So I have some good news in regards to time frame. Let's go to the agenda slide on page 2. The first 3 items, I'll talk a bit about the budget composition, our revenues, expenditures, our trends and changes for 23 budget. The second 2 items, the performance metrics and the bipartisan infrastructure law, those are both items that I brought to this committee when we did our KDOT 101. So essentially, the last 20 slides of this presentation will be repeat information for this committee because I wanted to present the same information on both the House and the Senate side in terms of budget, because the House subcommittee is made up of a variety of committees. I presented all of this information to them. You all may want to skip the last two portions. However, I'll point out the performance metric piece as it relates to the pavement is really significant. It's a major step forward for our state. So I wanted to bring that back to you all again. It is the essence of what performance-based budgeting really should be. All right, in terms of, I'm going on to slide 3 now, on how Kansas funds transportation. You all are familiar with this. We have the federal funds, gas tax. We do a little bit of bonding that's starting to come down, and sales tax that goes to the state highway fund. We share some of our funds with the Special City County Highway Fund. And then also there are some transfers, the ordinary transfers that go to other agencies. Next slide, which is 4. We have a fairly balanced portfolio currently in terms of revenue. About 37% comes from sales tax, 26% from motor fuels tax, and 23% from federal funds. In terms of expenditures, on slide 5, you see there about 3% goes to administration, 5% to planning, modal support, as you would want to see. 64%, the bulk of our expenditures go to construction. We have identified that in September, we want to go ahead and pay off some bonds early. So about $97.8 million in bonds we will pay off in terms of principal, which will save us $20 million, save us, meaning the state, $20 million in interest payments over time. So we're putting those dollars into offsetting some of our bonds. In terms of the State Highway Fund, slide 6, our budget differs somewhat from other agencies in that we have an unlimited budget, which I think is an unfortunate choice of words because nothing's really unlimited. But that's on the project side. That's where we do the construction piece and costs associated with projects. Then we have the limited side, which is the budget that we're talking about primarily today, agency operations, which we bring to you all. Included in that is salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, and capital outlay. We have a little bit of room within those categories to shift funds, but we bring those to you for your review as well. Okay, next slide, which would be our request, our agency ops budget request, so now I'm on slide 7, is close to 2012 levels. So you'll see our request now is at $306 million. If you look back to 2012, it was at $290 million. So you see we decreased from 2012 to 2013. You've seen a slow rise back up. When adjusted for inflation, actually the 2012 number would be $385 million. So we have been managing very tightly on the operations side. As a consequence of increasing construction, and you'll recall when I was with you last time, we have increased construction by 200% in the last 5 years. There are necessarily costs associated with managing that size of a construction program. We have been, I'm on slide 8 now, we've been managing to our budget much more tightly. So instead of, you can see in previous years, we had a budgeted amount, we weren't necessarily spending up to that amount. Now you heard Dylan talk a little bit about going ahead and purchasing some additional equipment. Our equipment's outdated. I'm glad we went ahead and made some of those purchases a little earlier. It helped us get a jump on some of the inflationary costs that we're seeing now, and quite frankly, some supply chain costs that we wouldn't even be able to buy some of the equipment that we purchased a little bit earlier last year. So it's all working out well, and you can see last year that we were budgeted at 279 and we came in at 279. That's what you want to do. You want to set a realistic budget, and then you want to expend the budget. So that's where we landed. Great. All right. I'll get us up now, hopefully, to where I am speaking. Okay. Well, we'll keep going. We're on slide 9. So I would like to point out in my conversation, okay, let's see if we can get everybody on the right page. Next slide. And the next one. And the next one. We can go. Okay, we're there. All right. So here we go. As I said, we have seen construction lettings increase. Our overall work is at $2.04 billion. And you can see $306 million would be our agency operations. So as a percentage of our overall spend, it has remained quite small, actually. Now, I do want to talk a bit about our 22 revised and our 23 request. You see the little icons there? I've got slides that will track with each of those icons as it relates to salary and wages, contractual services, on and on. The first two, salary, wages, and contractual services, very much tracks with need and demand. And then on the other pieces, commodities, capital outlays, that is in terms of restoring funding levels and keeping pace with cost increases. So let's talk a little bit first about the salary and wages piece, and I'll point out we are doing some advanced work that we haven't done before. US 69 in Johnson County would be a good example, where we're doing a managed lanes project that includes much more technology than we've ever used in this state before. So we do need some additional help, some additional expertise. You see us talking about the Advanced Tech Fund. We are trying to modernize not just our system, but how we deliver the system for our citizens. So you can see there is a little bit of increase in terms of cost in that delivery. We are challenged, and Senator Tyson, I appreciate your comments and your questions. We have 142 fewer employees than we had in 2017, and you can see we have temp positions that we are trying to fill as we go along. We are doing everything we can to try to both recruit and retain employees. I do recognize and appreciate Representative Francis and the hearings that he's held on the House side to get more input, and then he's even included employees. He's asked employees to come in and speak as well. We took the step in 2021 where we see the biggest problem is in our equipment operators. So those are the folks that plow snow in the winter and then turn around in the summer and they mow grass and they patch potholes and they fix signs. And we struggle to recruit those folks and we struggle to keep them because our pay is low. There are other issues as well, but that's the place where I think where we struggle the most. Based on the data that we used, we identified that it was particularly in the starting wage where we had trouble. I'm not saying that we don't have trouble all across the board. It was just the data indicated that's where we had our biggest problem. We had a turnover rate of about 25%. KTA has 9% turnover. They essentially do the same functions. So we requested to increase equipment operator starting pay to match KTA. We were able to fund that increase by $2.6 million salary savings because we don't have as many people as we have salary. So through that salary savings, we were able to increase the starting wage, and that impacted 638 employees. Again, I'm not saying that solved every problem. It was just a step forward in trying to recruit folks. Thus, going forward into the next year, we are requesting $159 million for salaries, which is a slight increase from the previous year, and it helps us make sure that we can not only continue that increase, right, because that's been put into place, but it will give us a little flex as we go forward. So that is, we have added positions, Senator Pyle, in traffic safety. We have lots of requests to do traffic safety studies so that we can understand where the conflict points are and what might need to be done as we're implementing a strategic safety program. In engineering, in HR, we have needed across the districts to improve our HR function. There is no doubt about that, and construction inspection. In terms of actions that would be helpful, certainly the 5% pay increase that's been suggested would be helpful for all state employees. We would welcome anything, if that even includes things like an increased contribution to CAPERS or better health care plans. Whatever you all can come up with, we welcome whatever steps you can take. All right, in terms of contractual services now, you're familiar with $5 billion will be allocated and invested in preservation, 2.3 in modernization and expansion, and 1.6 that goes into the Special City County Highway Fund. We know, as I've talked about, that we see that workload increasing in terms of construction lettings, and we have an estimate on preservation, modernization, and expansion as we head into 23, and you can see the ranges there. The ranges include both a little in terms of inflation, but also we're keeping a close eye on the contracting community to make sure that they can keep up with both their workforce and their material availability. We have seen, next slide, here we go, an increase in contractual services. Again, you'll note that it's a low percentage of the overall budget, but we do see an increase in our contractual services on the engineering side. We know that we're going to need more construction inspectors. We can't hire 200 of those. Quite frankly, in a program like this, it's important to also understand you don't want a state workforce to necessarily go up and down through the life of a program. If you think about the profile of a 10-year program, right now we're making up for lost time, right? We've got lettings that increase. In the back half of the program, the lettings level out, but the engineering work itself starts to decrease. So you front load a program with a lot of engineering, you start to see that level of engineering decrease. You don't want a workforce that floats up and down with each part of your program cycle. So that's one of the ways we manage the overall spend across 10 years, not just 1 year. Okay, we know that we have to deliver with the resources we have available. So we've seen a $9 million increase. We would project that in contractual services. We know we have fewer employees. We spend less on employee salaries. It's not because we want to spend less on employee salaries. It's because we can't hire people. If we were able to hire people, we wouldn't need to hire as many consultants. That's just the reality of the world. We have to deliver our work, and this is the best example. So in Kansas City, I would say in Johnson County particularly, and in Wyandotte County, we get tons of calls about trash. I mean, it's just tons of litter. We actually, for the first time last year, let a contract to outsource trash collection because we don't have enough people to pick up trash, patch potholes, do all of that work. For example, in Sedgwick County, we actually use prison labor to do trash collection. I can't explain all of the details, but what I can tell you is on the Sedgwick County side, there are supervisors available to go out and watch the inmates collect trash. That same situation doesn't exist in Kansas City, and you can't ask maintenance guys to keep an eye on the inmates picking up trash. Like, there's a level of security there that has to be protected. So there just isn't the same level of supervision available in the Northeast as there is in Sedgwick County. But that's a good example. We have to get our work done, and we'll find a way to get it done so that we can deliver what Kansans want and need. Okay. In terms of the 23 budget, as was already covered, the extraordinary transfers have been eliminated. There are ordinary transfers. We budget for those. Those are things like the highway patrol, collection of motor fuels tax. So we budget for those. We did talk already about the District 1 headquarters. We spread that over 2 cycles. I have been asked every single year if we could please move forward with the District 1 headquarters. I've said no each year until this year because now there is some money available. I would also tell you there is a consequence. Inflation is a thing. When that was first brought up, which was in 2007, the first feasibility study was done. At that time, it would have cost us about $14 million. Now it'll cost us about $18 million. So there's a consequence of not taking action. The last thing I want to hit on before I pause is to once again emphasize we have I am so pleased now in terms of the undersurface pavement metric that we can bring to you, and I talked about this the last time I was here. We have more work to do, but next year we'll be able to come to you and say, either bottom up or top down, what performance level do you want on your highways? Here's what it will cost. Or conversely, if you were to allocate $2, $4, $10, what performance level could you expect for that investment? And that's the kind of conversation that I look forward to having with you all, because that's the proper way to manage both a budget and an organization. And I look forward to when we have a little more data to be able to have that conversation. Chairman or Vice Chairman, I am happy to go on. These are slides that we've shown before. I can go through these, or I can pause now for questions. And then there is some additional information about the bipartisan infrastructure law, those additional funds that'll be hitting our books when Congress appropriates the dollars.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We'll move to questions, and with the limited amount of time, we'll then allow you to speak on that bipartisan infrastructure law. Questions committee for the Secretary on the budget presentation. Would you care to address Senator Pyle, I think, had some comments regarding the administrative position increase?
Sure.
Would you like to comment on the different positions that you're hiring there and the replacement of those construction positions?
Right. So I will want to make sure, I can talk in generalities, and absolutely we want to get more specifics for you. A good example would be on the traffic safety side of things. When we need to do traffic studies, that is where we bring folks into. It's called planning. It resides in our division of planning, but it's on the engineering side. In terms of the maintenance workers, it's not that we don't need maintenance workers, it's that we have positions that we have not been able to fill for years and years and years, and instead of carrying those positions, we might as well give them up. We have lots of unfilled positions. We have positions for engineering techs, which essentially are high school grads that have one class in algebra and one class in geometry. And those positions are open for over 200 days. So we've eliminated some of the positions that we just haven't been able to fill for years.
Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I was just reflecting on page 6 along the same subject here. Are there certain regions or areas of the state that you're seeing less employees?
Yes, and I would be happy. We've got some of that information. I'd love to share that with you. So there's no easy answer. And so the answer would be in the Northeast and the Southwest, for example. We struggle to fill those positions because the labor market, we have to compete for labor. It's not like those labor markets are pretty active. But you will also see in the Northwest, there just aren't as many people. So we struggle to fill those positions, but for a different reason. So it varies across the state, but we have average time to fill positions, and it varies significantly across the state. I would love to share that information with you.
Just one follow-up then. What's being done as far as, I know a lot of these positions, they may need special licensings operating. You're doing a lot of outsourcing on that. Can you elaborate a little bit in that area?
Sure. So, for example, it's not just on the engineering side, it would also be on the construction inspection side of things. So we outsource some of our construction inspection as well. We also are improving the tools that we're investing in better tools. I talked a bit about last time when I was here, like the e-ticketing, so that we don't necessarily have to have somebody just standing at the site taking a ticket, because the verification actually occurs at the plant site. So we are also going to take a look at risk-based inspection, where we spend more time and more effort on our high-risk projects and less time on sort of those traditional overlays. So addressing workforce shortage involves money. It involves workplace. We talked about the vast improvement we've had in safety, so it's a better work environment, but it also means having better tools and, quite frankly, more modern management practices.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This may be a question for Dylan. Yesterday, we heard in committee that the departments and agencies no longer have to come to the legislature for FTE or position approval. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand that statement yesterday?
Dylan.
Mr. Chairman, so the only limitation on agencies in a budget bill at this point is an expenditure limitation for the most part. There used to be years ago that there were FTE count limitations. So there's basically a section in the bill that says there shall be 2,297.3 FTE positions in the Department of Transportation. So that section does not exist any longer. There's no legislative control over the number of FTEs. There are regulations, like they have to go Division of Personnel Services, and so there's some executive branch sort of regulations, but not legislative regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's important for the legislature to understand, that it's a courtesy for the secretary, and maybe we need to bring that back to a legislative authority. But thank you.
Further questions for the secretary before we have her move on? Senator Pittman.
Just an overall question. You know, as we look at modernizing our system with some of the technology, in my particular region, you know the stories of K7 and the throughput challenges, the downtown area of Leavenworth in particular, as we try and figure out how to get a better throughput, and then the bridge across to, obviously that gets us over to MCI through the Atchison Northeast Corridor. There's a systematic challenge there, all up and down through there. Do you have folks dedicated to looking at those regional systematic challenges there, and maybe down in Johnson County, maybe around the Wichita area, that look at the system itself and look at strategies that might be implemented over the 5 to 10 year horizon?
Yes, so that would be it's called corridor management. And so we have within planning, I would also say it's very important. I don't see it as exclusively a state responsibility. It's in working in coordination and cooperation with the communities to talk about how they want their community either to grow or revise. But yes, we have corridor management that does that systematic look, which is really important.
To get a lot of different community partners, from the cities to the counties to the MARC to the state, and then MDOT in the particular border. So
I believe there actually is a study coming up with Leavenworth County.
there is.
Yeah.
Further questions, committee? Seeing none, we'll have you continue.
Okay.
The clock is ticking, however.
All right, you tell me how much I can.
Probably 5 minutes.
Let's go back to, the thing I really want to cover is, let's go to slide 25. All right, and I can run through this really quickly, but because it's a repeat for some of the, no, you said you wanted bipartisan infrastructure law. Let's go further back, way back to, let's go with 30. Let's go to 38. 38's the right place. Here we go. Okay. So this relates specifically to transportation. So, bipartisan infrastructure law. Helpful, yes. Additional money, yes. Once in a lifetime, unbelievable amounts of money, No, okay? Like, I just want to be super clear. It's 5 years of certainty. That's probably the most helpful thing, so that we can plan budgets and we can have certainty with our communities. It equates to $89 million more per year for 5 years on the highway side. Helpful, yes, but when you think about some projects are $100 to $300 million, it's not an astronomical amount of money, but it is helpful and it is important. New money, $45 million per year for bridges, very important. When you consider we have 25,000 bridges in Kansas, 20,000 of those are on the local system. We are very much pleased to see those dollars, and those dollars will primarily be used for county bridges. We'll work in cooperation with our counties on that. We have $8 million additional funds for electrification. That can be for charging stations. It can also be to help with electrification of fleets. We do not intend to own, we don't need to own more infrastructure, okay? This will be seed money working in cooperation with the private sector to get more charging around the state. I think if you think about the electrification of rural America, the co-op approach was a good approach. That might be kind of a construct to keep in your mind. Rural transit, $3.7 million additional dollars for rural transit. I'm worried about that money. It's not that we don't have needs in rural areas. It's not like people don't need to go to dialysis or get to the grocery store. We have a really hard time getting bus drivers. It's very hard to provide services across big geographic areas without many people. So that's one where we're going to have to spend a little bit of time. I'd also like to point out, these are not stimulus dollars. Good news. They're not use it or lose it kinds of dollars. They have to be obligated within a certain amount of time, but this isn't like where it was just like push everything out. So we have a little bit of time to be intentional and thoughtful about these dollars. We've already started conversations with the league and the association, and we'll be doing what I would call like local consult light this spring to make sure that we're working with our partners. I would point to that thing that makes me really excited on the right, that little plus, discretionary. Almost half the program are grant dollars, and we will be very actively seeking grants, regional grants, as well as project-specific sorts of things, but we'll be very active in trying to bring additional dollars to Kansas because those dollars are going to be used one way or another, so we might as well get our share. Okay, that concludes that piece.
Fantastic. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. Great presentation. Quick question about bridges, county bridges.
Yes.
So Wabunsee County, which I represent a small area in Wabunsee, has a bridge they've been trying to repair for years and years and years and years. So $45 million isn't very much if you have to replace a bridge. So is this primarily just repair of bridges?
It can be used in either way. So it's both repair and replacement.
Okay.
It's not, it's not a huge amount, but it's helpful. And we intend for it to be spread across the state, and it won't just go to a bridge or two.
Right. So is it a matching grant kind of opportunity for counties, or is it fully funding repair?
I need to check the language in the bill.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Further questions for the Secretary Committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Committee, we will work this budget. It is sizable on a date to be determined next week. So bring any suggestions, edits, recommendations that you have at that time. And with that, we are adjourned.